The East India Company was originally formed for pursuing trade with the East Indies, but ended up trading mainly with the Indian subcontinent. It was commonly associated with trade in basic commodities, which included cotton, silk, indigo dye, salt, tea, and opium. The company eventually came to rule large areas of India with its own private armies, exercising military power and assuming administrative functions. Company rule in India effectively began in 1757 after the Battle of Plassey and lasted until 1858. The company became increasingly ambitious and powerful. As the Mughal Empire disintegrated in the early 18th century and then the Maratha Empire became weakened after the Third Battle of Panipat, the relatively weak and unstable Indian states which emerged were increasingly open to manipulation by the Europeans through dependent friendly Indian rulers. The Government of India Act 1858 led to the British Crown assuming direct control of India. For most of the 19th century, India was ruled by the British. India was considered the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. In 1885, educated middle-class nationals had founded the Indian National Congress. Their aim was to get a much greater say in the way India was governed. The Swadeshi movement, part of the Indian independence movement and the developing Indian nationalism, was a strategy aimed at removing the British Empire from power by following the principles of self-sufficiency. Strategies of the Swadeshi movement involved boycotting British products and the revival of domestic products and production processes. Its chief architects were Aurobindo Ghosh, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Bipin Chandra Pal, and Lala Lajpat Rai. The Jallianwala Bagh massacre was one of the most ghastly massacres in the British rule of India. On 13th April 1919, a group of non-violent protesters, along with Baisakhi pilgrims, had gathered in the Jallianwala Bagh garden in Amritsar, Punjab. 50 British Indian Army soldiers, commanded by Brigadier General E.H. Dyer, began shooting at an unarmed gathering of men, women, and children without warning. The death toll was nearly 1,500. Following the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, Sikh political leaders organized peaceful protests to recover their shrines from British-appointed priests. At Nankana Sahib, they were set upon by hired thugs and massacred. These events coincided with Mahatma Gandhi's non-cooperation movement. The campaign was at its peak in 1922, but Gandhi's abrupt decision to call off the movement following violent scenes in Chauri Chaura, Andhra Pradesh, left many Indians disillusioned with non-violence. Since the arrival of the Simon Commission in 1928, the temperature of Indian politics had risen noticeably. Appointed to consider what should follow, the first small measure of self-government granted by the Government of India Act 1919, the Simon Commission had advertised its emptiness and mindlessness by failing to include a single Indian member. It was received everywhere with black flags and the famous slogan, "Simon, go back." At Lahore, the elderly and beloved Lala Lajpat Rai was struck across the chest and subsequently died. 2 months later, the English officer thought responsible for the killing was shot dead. This was alleged to be the work of a certain Bhagat Singh, who, some months later, entered the Central Legislative Assembly at Delhi. Accompanied by a companion, he scattered leaflets and threw a couple of bombs, not to kill, the leaflets explained, but to make the deaf hear. The two were arrested and the case came to be known as the Lahore Conspiracy Case. In September 1929, one of the accused died after a long hunger strike. His funeral procession brought demonstrators by the thousands onto the streets. Nor did the violence cease, for in December, shortly before the Congress met at Lahore for its annual session, the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, narrowly escaped death when a bomb exploded under his special train. In 1928, during the annual session held at Calcutta, it was decided that if India was not granted dominion status by the end of 1929, civil disobedience, which Gandhi had brought the country to the brink of 6 years earlier, would begin in earnest. Now, a resolution signed and adopted by Gandhi himself announced civil disobedience as soon as a time and an appropriate tactic could be determined. Dominion status would no longer suffice. India must have complete independence and she must have it at once. The unfurling at midnight on the 31st of December 1929 of the green, white, and saffron flag, the simultaneous reading all over India of the Declaration of Independence on January 26, 1930, now Republic Day, the mass resignations of Congress legislators, and Gandhi's march to the sea to pick up salt are all generally remembered during this period. The Salt March, also mainly known as the Dundee March, took place on 12th March 1930 and was an important part of the Indian independence movement. It was a direct action campaign of tax resistance and non-violent protest against the British salt monopoly in India. Mahatma Gandhi led the Dundee March from his base, Sabarmati Ashram near Ahmedabad, to the sea coast near the village of Dundee. As he continued on his 24-day, 240-mile march to produce salt without paying the tax, growing numbers of Indians joined him along the way. When Gandhi broke the salt laws at 6:30 a.m. on 5th April 1930, it sparked large-scale acts of civil disobedience against the British salt laws by millions of Indians. Early one morning, a family whose bungalow adjoined the central jail heard a commotion, guessed that Bhagat Singh and his friends were being hanged, and gave an alarm. Young Congress Party members spotted a police van leaving the jail compound, followed it into the country, saw several bodies being taken out and burned, and brought the remains back. Lahore awoke. A procession carried the remains to the banks of the river Ravi. Tension gripped the city. The tension was so acute that for 24 hours the police deliberately kept out of sight. Released from the following prison term, close on his march to the sea, Gandhi travelled to Delhi, closeted himself with Lord Irwin, and after a series of talks, agreed to discontinue civil disobedience if the government would release all political prisoners and make certain other concessions. By the end of 1931, Gandhi once again threatened civil disobedience, but this time the government struck so swiftly, arresting every congressman, that the second round of civil disobedience never got started. The Quit India movement was launched in August 1942 in response to Mahatma Gandhi's call for satyagraha. The All India Congress Committee proclaimed a mass protest demanding what Gandhi called an orderly British withdrawal from India. The Congress decided to organize a mass struggle on non-violent lines on the widest possible scale. Gandhi's slogan of "Do or Die" inspired the nation. Every man, woman, and child began dreaming of a free India. Protests continued through the 1930s and even during the Second World War. India sent and paid for thousands of troops to fight for the British Empire during the war. In August 1947, the Indian Independence Act was signed. This separated the Muslim majority areas from India to create the independent state of Pakistan. On 15th August 1947, the Union of India became an independent country with official ceremonies taking place in New Delhi and with Jawaharlal Nehru becoming the first Prime Minister and the Viceroy Louis Mountbatten staying on as the first Governor General.